what is going on now is a massive rescue effort. We have thousands of police officers and firefighters in Lower Manhattan trying to rescue as many people as we possibly can. There are still a lot of people there that are injured, hurt, dazed, and we're trying to get them out, and we're mobilizing all of our fire, police, and emergency resources to do that. The governor has alerted the National Guard, and they're being deployed to come and relieve us early to later this afternoon. And the urban search and rescue teams are coming here from around the country to also assist us. But until then, which means until probably 2, 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon, our police department, our fire department, and our emergency people are being stretched to the limit. And I'm sure we've also lost a significant number of them.
You're reluctant, I assume, to put any other name attached to the casualties except significant. Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't. I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10, 15 minutes.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
No, I went down to the scene, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
My question is, the Office of Emergency Management headquarters, into which you put enormous effort for coordination in a disaster like this, has it been damaged? Is it still operating? It's gone?
It's been damaged. I don't know how badly. And right now, that whole area of Manhattan, including the police department, which is another area we would operate from, City Hall, is another area we would operate from, have been closed off. So we've moved to a secure location in Midtown Manhattan where we're operating city government.
Is it fair to say, do you think, that all of your drills for dealing with terrorism and disaster are going according to plan, or has this been of such of magnitude that we've just all been caught totally off balance?
Oh, there's no question we were all caught totally off balance. No one could possibly expect large airplanes to crash into the World Trade Center the way this happened. I think, having said that, as I watched what the police officers and the firefighters were doing, I think they're going to save the maximum number of lives you could possibly save in a situation like this. I mean, the emergency efforts that they've been going through over the last 2.5 hours are nothing short of inspiring.
And when the National Guard comes in did you say to take over or offer some relief, what can the National Guard do that you cannot do at a city level?
Oh, at this point, what they can do is relieve men who are going to be exhausted physically and emotionally.
Now, just if you would, because I know how busy you are, just give us some sense of what you thought at the time about all this.
I thought that I would never live to see anything like this. I didn't think anything like this was possible. When I first arrived there, I rushed down there from Midtown Manhattan, and I saw the first building that had been crashed open. And when you look at it, it takes you a minute to really comprehend that this is actually happening. And to see people jumping from the top of the World Trade Center. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a nightmare that's worse than this.
Mr. Mayor, one last question. You said you never believed you'd live to see anything like this, and yet in the past you've been one of the leaders in preparing for just this
Absolutely.
Kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, but you keep you prepare for the worst, but you don't believe that it'll happen, and this is the worst. And I can only say that I thank God for the police department and the fire department that we have, because this would be much, much worse. And I'm also very proud of the people of the city. We evacuated Lower Manhattan with literally thousands of people, walked along with them, and they conducted themselves really, really, really well.
Well, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for communicating all this.
The Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, in his last term, immensely popular with some, not popular with others, which is not relevant at the moment, but because he puts his finger on something about New York. Whatever you think of New York, no matter where you live in the country, this is a city which behaves pretty well in crisis. There's a public spirit here in this city. You see it in blackouts, you see it in snowstorms. This is not the city of its It's not a city that we often criticize from other perspectives around the country in times of crisis. So when the mayor says he's proud of the people of New York as well as the fire department and the police, one should not be surprised. But it is fascinating and terrifying to hear what he says. You prepare for the worst and you never believe it'll happen. And his emergency management headquarters right down there near the trade centers, which are no longer possible to operate, this is what they put into place so that in the worst of circumstances, government would have a place to operate. And they can't operate from there. They've had to move uptown because the police department and City Hall are not operable, if you will, under the circumstances. And he, the mayor, you heard it yourselves, said he never believed he would live to see anything like this. True of many people. George Stephanopoulos in downtown Manhattan with an eyewitness.
Yes, Peter, I'm here with Neil Stevens, who was in his apartment downtown early this morning getting ready for work as he heard the explosion. Neil, why don't you tell us what you saw?
Okay, I was in my apartment. I was getting ready for work. I heard a large explosion, and I thought at first it was thunder because there was thunder last night, but there was nice weather outside, so I didn't know what it could have been. And I looked outside, and I saw some construction workers who were working on the roof of the building next to mine. They were looking downtown. They were all looking downtown, and I thought, I wonder what they're looking at. So I looked over, and I could see the World Trade Center towers from my window. And I looked over, and I could see the tower, and there was a huge gash in the side of it. It's about 10 stories high, almost the full width of the building. And there was black smoke just billowing out of it, and flames, large flames. And I thought, my God, I don't know what happened, but huge explosion. And that was pretty much it. And made some personal telephone calls, kept getting ready for work, and I was in the shower, and I heard the second explosion. And that's pretty much what I saw.
Neil, thank you very much. Peter, we also have some news on the evacuations. We've spoken with 2 security guards in the second tower who did say the evacuation to the second tower had begun. And we've also spoken with people who were on the 82nd and the 86th floor. So many people were evacuated. Of course, we don't have any sorts of numbers. One final note, Peter, I was picking up on what Mayor Giuliani was saying about the work of the firemen and the policemen. I would also add a word for the transit authority. The subways were terrifying earlier this morning, but all of the employees of the transit authority did a terrific job of evacuating the subways, even though they were filled with smoke, keeping people calm and keeping them actually in the station so that they wouldn't go out into the street as the soot was falling. One other word, Peter. Right now, the people who are working downtown are handing out these respirators because there is some concern that there was a great deal of asbestos in the building. So they're asking everyone downtown who is walking downtown, if they're down there, to put on these respirators, and they're handing them out on the corners.
Thank you very much, George Stephanopoulos, who continue to work this story from as close as you can get to the disaster area. But imagine a city that's sort of frozen in place. You saw a picture just a moment ago of the George Washington Bridge, which is closed except under very serious security circumstances. You can get across the. That means that's New Jersey on the other side, cut off from the island of Manhattan. All the tunnels are closed. The railroads are not operating, therefore, between New York and New Jersey. This island of Manhattan is pretty much frozen in place at the moment, while people wait and are reluctant to try to appraise the number of casualties that have been that have occurred in the World Trade Centers in their related area. But bear in mind that about 50,000, what did I say, Nancy, 50,000 people work in the trade towers, 80,000 people perhaps work in the adjoining areas. We've seen them in flight, and we have seen not one but 2 towers absolutely collapse upon themselves. And elsewhere in the country, we're still uncertain. There's still an unknown number of aircraft who've been ordered to land that haven't managed to get down to the ground. We're not absolutely certain that there are any aircraft on missions, if you will, which are unaccounted for, despite the fact there was a report some time ago that the aircraft which crashed outside Pittsburgh may have been on its way to Camp David. I emphasize that that's reporting of which we're absolutely not very sure at all. But ABC's Barry Serafin is at the Capitol at the moment, and we've been told for some time that the Senate leadership there was going to be sent to a secure location. Do you have a current status report, Barry?
Well, Peter, we're not sure exactly what we're seeing here, but a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, a military helicopter landed here behind me on the west lawn of the White House. And then a large group of people were seen to walk out to it, get on board, and fly right above us, over the mall in the direction of the Pentagon, perhaps. My guess, and it's only a guess at this point, is that these were members of the Senate leadership and the House leadership and perhaps members of the intelligence committees on their way to a briefing to try to figure out what in the world is going on today.
Were you able to walk up around the hill?
No, Peter, we, like everybody else, have been kind of pushed off of the hill. They've got a cordon for blocks now around the Capitol. In effect, they've sanitized that area. So we're about 4 blocks from the foot of the hill here.
And do you have any sense was there a sense of anticipation there? People sort of waiting for something to happen at the Capitol?
Well, there is. Every time any kind of aircraft shows itself, and there haven't been many, there have been a few government helicopters moving around, all eyes turn to the sky, as you might imagine.
Precisely, Barry. Thanks very much. Barry Seraphin, who's up at the Capitol. One of the things that is absolutely certain at the moment, which is to say that the chain of command in the country is very much in place. So you can just imagine yourself in some other country at the moment trying to anticipate, maybe even exhilarating at what's happening in the United States at the moment, and having some belief that you've disrupted everything. President's at 40,000 feet, just about to take off from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. We don't know where he's going, but I have to assume he's going to go to Washington. Cannot have the president being seen to be running around the country. By the way, the baseball games have all been postponed today. The entire Major League Baseball schedule has been postponed for today, as much as a mark of mourning and sadness for what happened in a variety of locations today. U.S. Earlier on evacuated embassies around the world. They're all quite familiar with that because on any number of occasions in the course of a year, you hear us say on the news that the State Department or the Pentagon has ordered a worldwide alert because something is going to happen or potentially going to happen. There's some kind of terrorist attack that's going to occur in some part of the world. The most recent terrorist alert, ironically, was in Asia over last weekend. In Japan and in South Korea, American embassies were put on alert because somebody somewhere in the in the intelligence establishment believed there was some potential for an attack. And it's something government has to do. It's something government has to do. Government has no choice, it argues. A lot of times you'll hear people saying, well, they've put up a state of alert again and nothing happened, and so they just do it all the time. And it's very hard on Americans traveling overseas to be somewhere where there's a state of alert. But as John McWethy, who covers the military establishment for us, points out, is something government is obliged to do, lest something ever happened and there had not been an alert. John, are you there? John McKenzie? John McWethy?
John McWethy's here.
Yeah, John, I'm sorry. I was obviously talking about not John McKenzie. This is I guess what one notices more than anything else today. This was a place where there was no terrorism alert. Nobody, I gather, that you've talked today seemed to know anything.
One of the things that they have been studying so scrupulously over the last several months is how Osama bin Laden and other terrorist groups operate, Peter. They felt that they had some ability to monitor critical communications from these groups. I think it's going to be proved that the groups have learned some very important and deadly lessons from past terrorist events and the way the U.S. has been able to monitor them. It seems quite clear in this instance that they bypassed the normal methods of communicating and were able to organize this very complex operation in a way that basically escaped American detection.
But John, I'm sorry, but I think a lot of Americans will hear you talking and be reminded that how often the government tells us how much more sophisticated it is and how much better able they are to monitor all this.
They are able to better monitor it, Peter, but every time, and you and I know this because we have had conversations with high-ranking government officials about how much detail we put on the air. Every time the news media puts on these details, it helps the terrorists to understand the way that our government goes about monitoring their communications. Oftentimes, those communications intercepts are very sophisticated, but the terrorists are clearly adjusting.
John, I wonder, by the way, on a slightly different subject in terms of today's disaster, whether you picked up reports of U.S. aircraft carriers being sent to New York Harbor to help in some way, maybe even to be floating platforms
I have not picked that up, Peter, but basically I'm standing on a highway at this point, so I'm not exactly plugged in.
I appreciate that, John, and we benefit tremendously from your knowledge, so thanks very much. Come back at us when you think of something else you'd like to contribute. We talk about, the United States and Canada cooperated today in closing down the airports. A reminder to us that all Canadian airports, or most Canadian airports, at least major Canadian airports, are very close to the U.S. border. We learned just a short while ago that Israel today, United States and Israeli relationships, so very close, closed all of its airspace to foreign aircraft today and evacuated many of its embassies and missions overseas. In terms of the war against terrorism, the United States and Israel are seen by the terrorists and the potential terrorists and the people who would do one harm as partners in this. And so it's perfectly natural for the Israelis to be doubly and trebly on a state of alert today. We've now managed to get the tape of President Bush speaking at Barksdale Air Force in Louisiana on his way from Florida to, as you heard Ann Compton say, somewhere. We assume Washington. And here's what the president had to say when he was in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward. And freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Well, the president could not have spoken more accurately in that final remark there. A great nation is being tested. And the president reassures the nation and anybody else in the world who will hear this that the nation will pass the test. And there is no doubt about that, I think. In the United States of America, as horrible as these incidents are and as tragic as Oklahoma City was, the great strength of the nation, is always there. I recognize that's one man's opinion and doesn't account for the individual shock of individual families or intelligence or military establishments, which have all suffered a grievous blow today in one way or the other. But it does say, I think, what people in most parts of the world believe, that as horrible as this is for the United States and its citizens, the United States continues to be unquestionably the leadership of the world and the example in the world of freedom and democracy. However much one may criticize it, ourselves included, on any given occasion or incident. It's interesting that in Oklahoma today, Governor Keating ordered all state office buildings closed, and the Oklahoma City Police created a one-block perimeter around the jail where Terry Nichols is housed. So again, you have an example of how people's minds work immediately. With somebody going to try to spring Terry Nichols from jail or Or was someone going to attack the jail in which Terry Nichols is housed? But in the wake of Oklahoma City, and based on what's happened this morning, nobody should be surprised. And the Associated Press has done a really good service here by checking with every state in the country so far. You know, as you watch this on the East Coast of the United States, think about that in California, all airports were closed. Places like Knott's Berry Farm were closed today. The Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles was closed. The Library Tower, all closed. And the State Emergency Committee convened, naturally under Governor Davis, to see that there was heightened security at all of the state buildings. In Florida, you know what happened. Walt Disney World was evacuated, closed its parks and shopping and entertainment complex. You're talking about the effect that this incident has all across the country. Airports were closed everywhere across the country, as we know, including in Georgia and Illinois, where the Sears Tower was also shut down, in Chicago, and all state government buildings in Chicago and in Springfield, the capital, were closed down. Indiana, all the federal offices were put on alert. In Kentucky, where the southern governors were about to have their full scope of their annual fall conference, it was canceled. And obviously the governors of Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, Louisiana, Mississippi all went home to their respective capitals because of this. In Louisiana, where the president has just left, the upper floors of the Capitol building were closed. The offshore oil port, which handles the super tankers in the Gulf of Mexico, suspended operations. And we've said several times this morning that when you think about terrorism, you think about oil supplies, and so that was fairly natural. In Michigan, the tunnel between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario, was closed to car traffic, and we do know from other reporting that security was increased at all of the border crossings between U.S. and Canada and between the U.S. and Mexico. But in all the states where there are military bases, including North Carolina, all of the military bases prepared for a possible change in status. And you heard Governor Pataki of New York say a short while ago that the National Guard from various surrounding states will be brought in here to give some sense of relief for the New York City Fire and Police Department, who must just be going through a hellish experience at the moment. John Miller, first of all, you've been on the phone for a little while. Tell me what you got.
Well, as things have developed at the scene, there have been a number of things that have happened. First of all, nobody in city government can right now put a number, even a ballpark estimate on the number of injured and dead. What they've done to try and deal with the large numbers they have is literally brought in students from NYU Medical School to help in the massive triage effort down there. The nearest hospital, Beekman Downtown Hospital, has lost steam power as a result of the explosion, which means they can't sterilize anything. So they've essentially become a MASH center and are feeding people out to other area hospitals.
Another reason to get the National Guard in here quickly, because they come equipped.
Right. Another thing, as New York City hospitals became overwhelmed, ferry boats began to shuttle victims across the river to New Jersey, to hospitals in Jersey City and Bayonne.
We saw, by the way, some ferry boats on the Hudson River a little while ago. So that was them ferrying casualties across
exactly
to New Jersey on the other side.
I spoke to some police officers that I know, police officers who used to work for me in the police department, who were at the scene, who gave the most incredible descriptions. First of all, police headquarters has been evacuated. There's a tiny skeleton crew there. It's considered a possible secondary target. They've moved police operations to another location, which we've been asked not to disclose, so that that doesn't become a possible target. The police commissioner is there now trying to get together enough information with the mayor and his people to actually brief us. Police precincts, and this is something eerie, Peter. We touched on this before about a city, an American city in a free country going into lockdown. The 75 police precincts in New York have been sealed off in a one-block radius to traffic and pedestrians.
All of which, I have to tell you, is alarming, but seems common sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, on a day like today, when nothing seems normal, such incredible things actually seem prudent. One of the officers I spoke to on the telephone, who was there when the first building collapsed, said he was standing across the street. He was assigned to find a senior FBI official to get a briefing for the top command, and that the building fell. He said, I ducked behind a truck, and I closed my eyes and hit the deck. He said, I waited 30 seconds thinking that was enough. Then I opened my eyes, and it was night. It was complete blackness. He said I began to crawl, and crawl for more than a block. And then I picked myself up off the street, but I still couldn't see. He said a kid who was outside the major dust actually saw him struggling for sight, went in there and pulled him out and brought him into the church at Barclay Street, where he washed his eyes out with holy water to try and regain his vision. He was covered with dust and soot. These are the kind of human descriptions of the stories of people who were there at Ground Zero when the first building fell. Pressing for some kind of numbers, they said, all we have is preliminaries, and they're too small. He said the Port Authority believes they may have between 10 and 20 cops involved in the building, in the rescues that are unaccounted for. The fire department, and this may be a lowball number also, between 80 and 100 firefighters.
An earlier report said there were 200 firefighters unaccounted for. Unaccounted for
at this time, and between 12 and 20 New York City police officers. Again, soft numbers, but unfortunately, the estimates are that rather than going down, they may go up. That's the fear.
This is the occasion, not one of those occasions. This is the occasion when a member of the police department, the fire department, or the military has got to respond only to the training. You just go into automatic and you do what you're trained to do.
It was amazing to me listening to the police radio traffic today, even as momentous disasters unfolded. I mean, the unspeakable. The collapsing of the Twin Towers, one after another, that while there was a high pitch to a lot of the voices and a little screaming and yelling, the rapidity with which calm was restored on the radio, and they went back to sending orders and continuing operations and acting in a logical manner, you really do revert to your training as a second nature.
As you look at this and you listen to John Miller, and I thank you, John, for that. No one is better plugged into the police and firefighting apparatus in New York City than John Miller. He not only been a reporter for most of his adult life, but he worked for the police department in New York for a while before he had the good sense to come back to journalism, and he is totally plugged in. But even and when he talks about soft numbers here, it's because as you look at this disaster scene, that's a live picture. That is a live picture 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 4.5 hours after this actually occurred, and you're looking at the smoke and the dust still emerging from the edges of these canyons in lower Manhattan, and the magnitude of trying to deal with these people, extends to moving them across the Hudson River in ferry boats, the ubiquitous ferry boat in New York harbors, not as necessary as they were in the days of greater ship travel, to the New Jersey side. And the Canadian Television Network, our partner, one of our partner television networks in Canada, is now reporting that American burn victims from here, I'm not sure whether it's the Pentagon or here, but I suspect it's from here, are being transported as far away as Canada to Canadian hospitals there. And there you get some sense of how difficult it is to get a real grasp of how enormous this is, other than to say, as the mayor of New York and the governor of New York State both said to us a short while ago, I just don't want to touch the casualty figures as of now. Pierre Thomas, who's been with us for much of the morning, also reports from the FBI. And we may never know much more about one of the aircraft than this, that at least one of the planes this morning, we haven't got no more details on that, was able to communicate that it had been hijacked. In some cockpits, in some of the aircraft now being used in commercial service, there's a button you can hit that sends a code to your headquarters that says you've been hijacked, so you don't have to try to tell the hijacker that you're actually talking to headquarters. But that's as much as we know about one of the several aircraft today which were involved in attacks on the United States. Now, Diane Sawyer at Times Square has been trying, I know as best she can, to get some handle on casualties vis-a-vis the people who are pouring into hospitals. Diane?
Right, Peter. Here's all I know, and it's kind of postscript to what John Miller was saying earlier. With Beekman Hospital, the closest hospital, as he said, has been relatively out of commission. But St. Vincent's Hospital, which is one of those in the next perimeter, 25 major hospitals in New York, this is one of the next closest, told us just minutes ago they had 184 hospitalized, 2 dead. Now, again, we know that these figures are going to be changing almost minute by minute, so this is very early. But at this time, and by now we're talking just minutes ago, 184 hospitalized, 2 dead. They said to us again, though, remember that where the World Trade Centers used to be, there is now a mountain of rubble. We are talking 200,000 tons of steel, 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, and 43,600 windows with all the glass in them now just lying on the ground. So the excavation has only begun, but 184 right now from St. Vincent's.
Thanks, Diane, very much. And I must tell you, I feel a little embarrassed about trying to focus on casualties in numerical terms only because it will of the magnitude of this attack on top of the buildings themselves being brought to the ground, and similarly true at the Pentagon. So nobody feels gruesome, or it's not about the gruesomeness of the casualty figures. It is simply trying to get some sense of the magnitude in human terms rather than the physical terms, which so much of us in the country saw just before our eyes. Before I talked to John and to Diane, I was just running there briefly through various different parts of the country where the ripple effect of these attacks were felt. In Las Vegas, for example, this is back to the Associated Press report, which they did a really good job pulling the country together. Security was increased at all of casinos on the Strip in Las Vegas, because if you think about it, for the enemies of the United States, that kind of excess is seen as a symbol of the United States as well. The only place we could find all of the federal buildings open so far was in Vermont, where the federal buildings in Montpelier and Burlington were both open. And, you know, they have an atomic energy plant up there, and it was placed on a state of heightened security as well. Whereas in Nebraska, you'll see the first of probably many examples of this in the hours and days ahead. State employees were asked if they would give blood, because blood will be needed. There is a blood shortage in the United States, as we've heard time and again from the Red Cross. It's almost at a state of crisis in terms of blood collection in the United States at the moment. And so and what do you need in a time like this? You need blood, and you need plasma for all the people who have been hurt and damaged, and so that's important. And in Nebraska, state employees were responding to requests for blood donations, and at the Air Force bases out there, and then the security was heightened. And at churches all over the country, they're beginning to have these services, which will become part of the national fabric in the next couple of days, as people pray for the victims and those we hope are survivors of this. Terry Moran is at the White House, which is his normal beat. He didn't go with the president to Florida today. It's often the case that if the president's doing a purely political trip, we ask him to stay home to give us a broader sense of things. Well, Terry, what's the state of the White House as of now?
Well, Peter, the White House has pretty much been evacuated altogether. Just before it was evacuated, we are told that the national security team was taken to the secure situation room in there, but they are the only people in there. White House staff, most of the White House staff was told to go home. And the president, as you've heard, flew to Louisiana and is now en route, we don't know where. As he said, he is trying to make sure that the country knows that the government is still running. We've seen around town motorcades assembling outside the various cabinet departments, and we've just seen recently some traffic into the White House. So there is some government activity, but without the president at the moment.
Terry, there's a very small collection of reporters and camera team on board the President and Air Force One at the moment. I think the only reporter on board is Ann Compton, am I correct? Or certainly the only television reporter on board?
Well, actually, Ann is in the radio seat today. The pool, as it's called, is flying with the president. Today, CBS News is the pool. It alternates every day.
Right.
This pool will travel with him wherever he goes, and he made that statement that we saw earlier to the pool. The rest of the press who is accompanying the president to Florida, we are told, is now on a bus because of the air traffic shutdown from Florida back to Washington.
Terry, I wondered if, from your perspective of our White House correspondent, whether you agree with me, and certainly our political director, I think, who says that how the president now spends his time today, what he is seen to do, is absolutely vital, not just to the country, but to him.
Well, it's critical time for him. He said that the nation is being tested, the new president is being tested as well. But he has other restrictions on what he can do. That political mission he has to reassure the country and to show that he is leading it is actually secondary or even tertiary. The first thing is he has to keep himself safe. The Secret Service is going to insist that he be secured, and then second, he must remain in efficient strategic communication with United States forces around the world. That's undoubtedly why they took him to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport. But you're absolutely right. The main thing he has to do for most Americans is communicate to them that he's in charge, that he intends to take control of this situation, and as he said, hunt down the people who are responsible for it and punish them.
Terry, I know you want to go back to your reporting. Is there anything else you want to add at the moment?
Well, Peter, it's just that this whole complex, which is usually abuzz with activity, which is really an office for hundreds of people, is now silent for the most part, and an armed camp. And that is a very striking thing for all of us who go to work there every day.
And what I notice is you're to the south of the South Lawn. You're on the southern side of the White House. We very often see you broadcasting from the other side of the White House. Why are you way down where you are?
Well, we've been cleared out of the North Lawn, which is where we normally broadcast from, and we are now, as you can see, south of the south ellipse of the White House. I can tell you that the evacuation of the White House itself, which has happened before with bomb threats and suspicious cars and packages, today did not proceed as orderly as it has. I was told by one of the White House staffers that their security official came in and said everybody should leave in an orderly fashion, and about a minute later an agent ran in and said, just run, get out.
Okay, thanks very much, Terry. We'll come back to you, but you get some sense from Terry Moran standing there, locked dramatically out of the area with which he is so familiar. We saw some pictures earlier today. I'm here we get them up again for people who have just joined us, of people leaving the White House early on. First, the White House police walking out fairly casually, and then as the tension began to build and the awareness of what was going on began to be heightened, people began to run outside of the White House. This is a place supposed to be, quite extraordinarily secure. And he was, I think, more than anything else, this concern that somehow the enemy, however one defines the enemy today, had control of airspace, and that they were able to approach these otherwise secure locations from the air, therefore making them more vulnerable. But the United States has not faced any emergency like this in the modern era. And as our political director, who's also working as hard as his unit can at the moment on this, points out, information is scarce because in situations like this, reporters like us rely on government officials to tell us what is going on with government and what sort of job government is doing. And the national government is pretty close to being on what amounts to a national war footing at the moment, and it's very difficult to reach government officials. So I see Pierre Thomas, who's just come to join us, and we'll talk to him in just a moment, that is trying desperately to reach all of his contacts in the FBI, and my guess is he's having a very hard time. At any rate, Linda Douglas is in Washington with us tonight, and she is with Joe Biden, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who will undoubtedly have something to say. Yes, Linda.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's been very difficult to get to you today because all the communications around the Capitol have really been shut down. As you know, earlier today, the entire Capitol was evacuated, the members of Congress, the staffs. There were some very frightening moments where they were shouting at us to get down. They thought something was going to happen. The leaders of the Senate were taken away early this morning to an undisclosed location by security, and security has also told other leaders of Congress to leave the area. The minority leader of the House, Richard Gephardt, was taken away in a Secret Service vehicle. And as you say, with me here is Senator Biden, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and has just been meeting with other members of Congress and getting security briefings from the police mostly. But Senator Biden, what about this fear that has been communicated to the members of Congress by the security people that they should stay away right now from the center of the Capitol?
Well, I think maybe initially that made sense, Linda, but I don't think it makes sense now. The air is secure now with military planes. I think we should get back as quick as we can, Peter, into session. Now, I don't want to second-guess the security people. They want to be able to sweep the area and make sure everything's squared away. But I think we should be meeting tomorrow morning. Let the American people understand that these thugs who have done this incredible thing to the United States have not in any fundamental way altered our ability to do business. And so I think it's very important we get back to business. I've communicated that to the Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, who I think shares my view on that. And when I spoke to Senator Daschle, by the way, he was home. He was here in town. There's a number of members of Congress. Congressman Brady from Philadelphia and a number of my colleagues are literally downstairs waiting for me now. So I think we have to show that we're up, we're ready to move. We are, in fact, nothing has fundamentally altered this government. And the tragedy that occurred to these thousands of people is one that we must, in fact, follow through and find out who's responsible for. But in the meantime, we should be calm and cool and collected about going about our business as a nation. Terrorism wins when, in fact, they alter our civil liberties or shut down our institutions. We have to demonstrate neither of those things have happened.
Senator Biden, a couple of the senators I've spoken to and members of Congress as well are saying that we are now at war. Senator Shelby, who is the ranking Republican on the Intelligence Committee, says we are now essentially at war. We have to be on a war footing. Senator Hagel has said that we've got to start securing our borders, locking down our airports, revisiting the way we protect our public institutions. What about that?
I hope that's not true. I would say it another way. I would say we've come face to face with a new reality. A reality that we knew existed and we knew was possible. A reality that has happened in varying degrees in other countries. But if, in fact, in order to respond to that reality, we have to alter our civil liberties, change the way we function, then we have truly lost the war. The war is one that allows us the way to conduct the war is to demonstrate our institutions are functioning, that your civil liberties, your civil rights, your ability to be free and walk and move around, in fact, are not fundamentally altered. Anybody who's willing to strap dynamite to their body or have a suicide kamikaze mission, you'll never fundamentally be able to stop. It doesn't matter what you do. There are a lot of things we can do, though, to diminish significantly the possibility of this happening again without changing our character as a nation.
Well, it's an amazing scene here, Peter. The skies are clear. There are usually planes in the sky. The skies are clear over the Capitol. The streets are completely empty. There is still smoke rising up from the Pentagon where the plane hit the Pentagon earlier. And as you can see, the members of Congress are all trying to grapple with what to do next. Senator Biden, of course, is going to be receiving all kinds of security briefings.
Linda, I have a question, if I may.
Yes, Peter. Go ahead.
I have a question for the Senator. I apologize via you. The Senator is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so he is party to all of the information in the intelligence community. Was the intelligence community so taken up with the idea of chemical and biological warfare against the United States that they didn't pay enough attention to this possibility?
Well, they clearly understood this was a possibility. The problem has been we have been focusing, in my view, I don't want to second-guess anybody here. Look, the prospect of a chemical, biological, pathogen probability is real. Some of us, literally as recently as yesterday, I spoke to the National Press Club and talked about the fact that it's just as easy to fly from National Airport into the White House as it is to, do the same thing in New York. I mean, look, we know all these possibilities exist. And one of the things we have to do is we have to get our priorities straight in terms of what the real threats are that face us and use the assets we have to begin to deal with those threats. What I don't want everybody to think is this is some worldwide conspiracy where there's tens of thousands of people who are part of this army that attacked us. This is a group of people who are very well organized, obviously are relatively well funded, and we have to figure out how their network has worked, but we have to penetrate it. But we can't, Peter, just say we're going to focus only on this kind of incident and not on chemical and not on biological and not on pathogens, not on anthrax. This, in a sense, is the most god-awful wake-up call we've ever had.
Senator, let me ask you
how we have to redirect our resources.
Let me ask you one more question, then. I didn't realize you could hear me. At the Pentagon and the State Department, you'll already hear people doing what they almost always do in an instance like this. This is so sophisticated it must be Osama bin Laden. Maybe so, but is the United States too focused on one man?
The tendency in these circumstances is to be too focused on one man, one idea, one prospect. I think that we should be calm. Those of us who hold high public office, just calm down a little bit, collect our thoughts, collect the information and in a methodical way analyze what we know happened and what we can derive from that. I think it's much too early for us to make those kinds of judgments. The first thing is what the president is doing. He called for calm, he's getting in the airplane, he's coming back to Washington, D.C., and I applaud him for that. And we should be back up and running as quickly as we can. And I think we should do that. This cannot be dealt with overnight. It's an incredible tragedy. But it's the new threat of the 21st century that we are now facing. And we're going to find a way to deal with it. This nation is too big, too strong, too united, too much a power in terms of our cohesion and our values to let this break us apart. And it won't happen. It won't happen.
Many thanks, Senator. And Linda, do you want to add something? Linda Douglas?
Well, I just want to say that this is the beginning of what will clearly be an enormous, profound debate here in the Capitol. The dynamics of the debate in this country, as I've discovered in talking to members of Congress, have been fundamentally altered now. And here you're hearing a discussion of whether we should lock down, open up, and how we tackle this, and what our priorities are, and how we protect ourselves. So I've had just astonishing conversations with members of Congress, Peter, and there's a very grave feeling here right now in the Capitol.
Linda, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Biden, as well. We'll have Linda Douglas available to us all the time, thank goodness, and Senator Biden says one of the most profound things about all this, which we've said several times this morning, which the terrorist wins when he or she manages to alter the behavior of a people or infringes on the way of life in a country, that the country, a democratic country particularly, alters its way of life, because that's a step up for the terrorist in question, because it raises the whole question of civil liberties and access and freedom of movement. And Pierre Thomas has just come back to join us. You've had this tremendous argument covers the Justice Department for us. You had this tremendous argument in Washington as to whether or not that street outside Pennsylvania Avenue outside the White House should be open again to vehicular traffic or kept closed. I mean, terrorists is already winning in that one regard.
Absolutely. And members of Congress and members of the D.C. delegation in particular have been arguing to reopen Pennsylvania Avenue. The Secret Service has been adamant. You cannot reopen it. Oklahoma City showed the nation what can happen with a car bomb. Peter, I just got off the phone with a very senior FBI official, and he talked about the feeling of people being stunned at the FBI. The FBI Director, Robert Mueller, the Deputy Director, Tom Picard, are at the Special Operations Center. They are communicating with the various field offices. And two bits of information. One, they said that there was communication from one of the planes noting that they had been hijacked. And I had a rather interesting conversation about that. He said, the problem is that there's no system in place. Once the plane notifies that it has been hijacked, no system in place to stop an ongoing attack. He said, think about it. If we had had time to notify the military would have had to make a decision. Do we shoot the plane out of the sky?
Well, both of you have to help me. You and John Miller have to help me on this, because they put this device in the cockpits so that notably airlines would know if one of the aircraft had been hijacked. But nobody really, I mean, I'm sure people did think, but not many people thought hijacks were going to lead to using these aircraft as full-scale kamikaze flights against public buildings. I don't remember either one of you the last, if ever before, there's been the use of a civilian aircraft to attack a public installation in any country in the world. I may be wrong on that.
You know, it's certainly something so rare that I can't conjure one up. Two things come to mind. One, in or about 1980 or 81, a man with a gripe flew a plane in circles around the United Nations building, threatening to crash it into the building if his demands weren't met. And police helicopters went up. Police hostage negotiators began to talk with him, and they literally talked him and his plane down in LaGuardia Airport. Two, in 1994 or 5, on the day of the signing of the crime bill, ironically, a man crashed his plane into the White House. And I remember as a police official attending the signing of the crime bill with this plane sticking out of the White House's doorway under a shroud. So you've had those, but certainly nothing approaching this scale, and certainly nothing approaching this scale with passengers involved. I mean, you have the crash of Egypt Air Flight 990, where U.S. officials believe that the co-pilot intentionally crashed into the ocean, but again, not into a target.
On the phone with us at the moment is the former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, Sandy Berger, who's now an independent consultant with a company that consults between the U.S. and foreign countries. Mr. Berger, do you hear me?
Yes, I do, Peter.
Hey, Sandy. I have one question for you, because it isn't so long ago that you were in and or adjacent to the White House. This could have been on the Clinton watch as well as it could have been on the Bush watch. What would be the first thing you would have done?
Well, you know, the first responsibility here, obviously, is to the people who are trapped in these buildings. This is first and foremost an undertaking here of relief and rescue.
But that's not the job of the National Security Advisor. Well, what is the National Security Advisor?
This may involve the National Guard. It may involve other elements, and you have to. That obviously has to be our first priority. Second, securing, as clearly the government has done, other facilities that may be targets, and then. Looking at
can I just interrupt you again? Is there a book for this? Is there a book of rules, or do you just have to think, oh boy, we better lock down this, we better lock down that?
Well, you know, we have suffered a massive and coordinated attack here, Peter, beyond the scale of anything we have seen before, and be qualitatively different than anything we have seen before, and. The United States, we will determine who is responsible for this. The footprint here, so to speak, is large enough that we will know who is responsible, and America will respond. But we need to do it with determination and also with steadiness. We have to determine who is responsible. Why this could happen without detection from so many different locations within the United States, and then respond accordingly.
All right, let me ask you this, because you've raised the issue. With all of the resources available to American intelligence agencies, not to mention your cooperation with foreign intelligence agencies, you've just said the footprint is large enough, we're going to find somebody. What on earth do you mean?
Well, we're talking about a number of planes. We've obviously had this operation happen relatively simultaneously. It's a sophisticated operation, and there's no question in my mind that we will determine who is responsible, and we will respond in a substantial and firm way. This has been a brutal attack against the United States.
Mr. Berger, you know better than I do that in the past we sometimes assign blame to people because it's important, but we don't always know who to blame. So can I ask you if you just see any clue this morning, if in your job as National Security Advisor, you see any clue you would have done anything to begin to try to find out who might be responsible for this?
Well, I think it is. We have to be careful here not to jump to firm conclusions. We did that after Oklahoma City. We did that after the World Trade Center bombing. They were both wrong, but there are certain elements here, suicide bombings, which do have the character of radical militants from abroad. I think that's certainly where I know. The intelligence community is focused intensely.
I have one last question for you, and it's really just a feeling question. You are now an independent consultant helping American businesses do business overseas, or helping other, get through the American bureaucracy. When you talk to your friends and contacts overseas, will they see the United States as weakened by this?
Well, I think it depends very much, Peter, on how we react as a country. We have suffered a grievous attack. But if America here has to respond with steely determination, but also with steadiness, and that means, first of all, dealing with the victims, dealing with security, finding out who's responsible, and taking whatever action is necessary and appropriate. It also means continuing to expect and demand the highest level of cooperation from the rest of the world in going after this kind of terrorist threat. This is not just an attack on the United States. It's an attack on the civilized world. And it ought to be seen as an attack on our European friends, on our Middle East friends, and on others. And the response here cannot simply be an American
airstrike
response.
Somewhere. In other words, you can't just mount an airstrike against somebody. It won't be satisfying, right? It may be satisfying, won't be satisfactory.
I wouldn't certainly, you don't rule out a military component of this, but you also have to get to the root of this.
Okay, Sandy Berger, thank you very much. Former National Security Advisor in the Clinton administration, one of the most important members of the foreign policy establishment in the Clinton administration, now an independent consultant, as people in government tend to do when they leave government. It's been hard this morning as we continue to look at the smoke and the dust drift up from a crime scene, as John Miller called it, which we cannot feel in any intimate way on television, only through our reporters and through getting closer in and talking to the cops and the firefighters and the survivors. But we will in time get in there. But in the meantime, we've been trying very hard to figure out all of these airplanes. Because we have a couple of we've got 4 significant aircraft today which have been involved in disasters. And we've asked Lynn Scher, one of our reporters, to try to nail down what we know and what we don't know. Lynn, are you there?
I am, Peter. As you point out, it was airplanes that were the weapons of destruction today, not bombs, passenger planes. We actually know very little for sure about what happened, but we do have some details. And bear with me because the information keeps changing. But I want to start with the only one that horribly we actually did see happen. And this, of course, was the plane that crashed into World Trade Center number 2. That, of course, was the South Tower. That's it on the right. Now, and there's the flame from it. What you're seeing is the North Tower. Behind it, there's a second identical tower. As you know, that plane crashed right into it. All morning, we have been told by American Airlines, among others, that that flight, that airplane, was actually American Airlines Flight 77 going out of Dulles to Los Angeles. We were told 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots on that plane. It was hijacked at 9:03. I'm sorry, it was hijacked right after takeoff, crashed into the tower at 9:03 a.m.
Let me stop you right there, Lynn, because I've had different information, so I'm going to rely on you here. You now believe that American Airlines Flight 77, which took off for Dulles on its way to Los Angeles, crashed into the trade towers, not into the Pentagon.
We were told that originally. What I'm about to tell you is that the FBI is now saying that that's the one that went into the Pentagon. The FBI spokesperson is saying that the flight that went into World Trade Center Tower number 2, that South Tower, was in fact United Airlines 175, a Boeing 767 that left Boston for LAX, departed at 7:58 a.m. this morning. 56 passengers, 2 pilots, 7 flight attendants. This is confusing. I apologize. We are getting 2 different answers to our questions. What I can tell you that appears to be accurate is that the plane that crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:45 a.m. was in fact American Airlines Flight 11, American 11, going from Boston to LAX, 7:59 a.m. departure, hijacked right after takeoff, 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, 2 pilots. We know of 1 other aircraft involved in today's episode, Peter, United Airlines Flight number 93. This was another Boeing 757, left Newark at 8:01 this morning en route to San Francisco. 38 passengers, 2 pilots, 5 flight attendants. It went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is near Johnstown, which is just southeast of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I believe we have some video of that crash site right there, and that's where this flight went down. We are waiting for a press conference from the airlines to try to make some of this clear to us, but right now that is all the information we have on those 4 planes.
Can I just absolutely confirm, because I'm trying to make it even clearer for people, though you did a much better job than I did. This is from the FBI spokesperson you're talking about, right?
What I'm telling you is that the FBI spokesperson has said United Airlines 175 from Boston to LAX is the one that went into the World Trade Tower number 2, the South Tower. The FBI is also telling us that it is American 77 from Dulles to LAX into Los Angeles Airport that went into the Pentagon.
Okay, thanks very much. So what we have now in terms of the trade towers, we have one American Airlines aircraft, one United Airlines aircraft, which hit the 2 trade towers. We have a second American Airlines aircraft, which goes into the Pentagon. And we have a third aircraft, United Airlines, which we have no idea about, either whether it was on a mission or for what reason it crashing southeast of Pittsburgh today. But 3 major aircraft today carrying considerable numbers of passengers and crew on board are all down, at least three of which appear to have been involved in a coordinated attack on the United States. I should also tell you that abcnews.com plays an important role in our life all the time, but it's very important at a moment like this, and has a good many offerings up at the moment, including a continuous reporting of the work we're doing here on television and they're doing on their own. There's a reader messenger board up there, as always, and that very often provides information. It has a lot of reporting on the status of air travel and the FAA response, most of which I think we've reported here, but if you want to get it locked into your mind, you can go to abcnews.com. And then there is a lot of reporting, as there always is at abcnews.com, about the ramifications of this to individuals, to communities, and to the country as a whole. Tony Cordesman is in Washington at the moment. And Tony, since I talked to you last, I'm not sure how much more we or you have learned about this attack or the coordinated nature of it. Have you learned any more?
I think, Peter, as you watch this develop, you have to say